So I wanted to say hello. Thank you for joining the third class in a series of just-in-time trainings developed for Oregon, Washington Public Affairs and Public Information Community of Practice. Today, we begin Module 2 with Class 201, Closing the Gap. My name is Chris Barth. I'm a member of the cadre that has been developing this training series. I am one of the lead PIOs on PNW2 Incident Management Team. I am also a fire mitigation specialist and a member of the fire communications team for BLM Montana, Dakota's Fire and Aviation Management. Joining me today is Sarah Sarlos. Sarah is also a lead on PNW2 Incident Management Team and will be presenting later. And finally, we have Kale Casey, also with PNW2, who will be presenting the final section of this class. So why are we doing this? I know some of you who joined us last week saw some of this material, but just to get everybody on the same page, for those that may have missed Module 1 last week, the Regional Fire and Communications Leadership identified a need to explore the unknowns and assess individual readiness to respond to a wildfire during a pandemic. This was also identified in the Northwest Incident Management Team Best Practices. There was a recommendation for a survey of Northwest Fire Communications individuals to hear their self-reported training needs with the goal of offering just-in-time training quickly to prepare individuals with their reported needs. The design of these trainings has been intended to be responsive to the reported needs and rapid, developed and delivered quickly with the goal of completing the series of 3 modules before fire activity picks up in July in the Northwest. As we shared last week, the just-in-time training covers 3 modules, 6 classes, and a simulation. We're asking for participation in Class 102, 103, 201, and 202 in order to participate in the simulation, Class 301, as the scenarios build on what was covered in those classes. If you missed one of the 4 required courses, you can still sign up for the simulation, but we ask that you watch the recorded classes prior to the simulation. As a reminder, Class 203 is expected to be delivered at a later date. Handouts, including the class PowerPoint and a PDF, will also be available in the respective class folder within this team. Again, that team is 2020 ORN WC _ PAO _ PIO _ BMP and Teams in FireNet, and we'll head there in a minute to walk you through Teams just to orient everyone. In each of the classes, we're going to try to represent the public affairs, public information dichotomy. The modules are designed to build on each other, and as a result, you might hear some things in one class and find that we talked about it in a previous class, or we will be building on it in a future class. The overall syllabus is designed to work through preparations from pre-incident through incident and culminates in Class 301, again, a simulation that will cover various scenarios. So now let's take a quick look into teams. First, I wanted you to note in the upper right that I'm showing you I'm in my FireNet Teams environment. I've included a call out on the bottom showing a clip of what it looks like in my DOI Teams window. And again, I know there's a number of people that their agency has teams, whether it's USDA or DOI. And again, you need to be knowing which one you're operating in. On the left side, I've highlighted this team's environment. Again, you can see there 2020 _ ORN WC _ PAO, etc. Again, on the left, I've highlighted the this team environment to show that we're now in that team. And the information in the right panel are the files for the general channel within this team. At the top, I'm confirming that I'm in the general channel of this team, and I'm also in the files within this channel. And all the folders are displayed below in the right pane. Again, still in this team's environment, here I've selected the folder for Class 102, Supply and Demand from last week. And now you can see the folder and file within the Class 102 folder. And if I click on the resources from the previous slide, I can now see all of the files within the resources folder. Again, those things that we shared with you all last week at the conclusion of that class. And finally, I just wanted to show how to join a team. I've highlighted the area at the bottom left where join a team is located. Again, in FireNet, you cannot create a team like you might be able to do in your agency's team environment. But in the right pane, I've highlighted where you can enter a code to join a team, as well as where you can select a team that's available to you. If you've not already joined this team, you should see access to that here. So now let's get back to today's material. Okay, in this class, Closing the Gap, we're going to focus on understanding risk assessment and trade-off analysis for the information function, reaching all audiences through an evolved low-tech approach to information delivery, and talk about creating and sharing information with an awareness of equity, diversity, and inclusion. This class and 202 tomorrow, like class 102 and 103, will be about 2 hours long. The simulation, again, class 301, is expected to last about 3 hours. After each unit of the class, there will be an opportunity to ask questions about the material. We'll take a brief break after each of those units, and at the end of the class, we'll summarize the content, share resources, and introduce the next class. So a couple of reminders about virtual meeting etiquette. We ask that you keep your camera off and mute your microphone during the class. Please use the chat feature if you have questions. If you do not have access to the chat feature, just by virtue of how you entered this meeting, when we get to questions, please raise your hand and the moderator will call on you to ask your question aloud. We'll answer your questions to the best of our ability. And before we begin, this is a good opportunity just to take a deep breath. Remember, we're all in this together. We have these different experiences. We've experienced the last several months differently, and it's okay that we're approaching this from different comfort levels. So take a deep breath as we share some examples of conducting an information risk assessment and trade-off analysis, connecting with communities in non-traditional ways, and making sure the information we provide is equitable to all audiences. As I mentioned, we're going to start off today talking about conducting an information risk assessment. If you've ever participated in a planning meeting during a wildland fire, you're likely familiar with the 215 and the 215A. I'm showing the basic ICS 215 and 215A from the National Wildfire Coordinating Group, or NWCG, here. You may be familiar with a modified 215A that is used by many incident management teams. When it comes to risk assessment on wildland fire incidents, we typically think about operations, and specifically the hazards of the proposed tactics, as well as the mitigations that the safety officer and the operations section chief have discussed to overcome or reduce the risk of the proposed action. This process is less commonly used for information, if at all. This is not intended to be a graduate level course in risk management, but instead to introduce how the risk assessment can be used in information to make informed, risk-based decisions for the work that we do. This has particular relevance this fire year, but can and should be used always. So first, let's introduce some terms. Risk is a term that people use casually to talk about exposure to danger or harm. But simply, risk is equal to the probability times the consequence, or in other terms, how likely and how bad. To help us think about this, I'm going to use an example that's familiar to me and hopefully to all of you. Wildfire risk to a home or a community. In terms of probability, if you live in the wildland-urban interface, or WUI, your probability of being affected by a wildfire increases. If you live in the city, your probability likely decreases. And in terms of consequence, if you take no action to reduce your risk, the consequences of a wildfire damaging your home increase. And if you take action like reducing fuels around your home or introducing some fire-resistant construction materials, your consequences decrease. So now let's think about our work in context to COVID-19 considerations before going too much further. So before I begin this slide, I have a few disclaimers. This is probably new to many of you. This is a draft example of a risk assessment tool designed to inform considerations for COVID-19 wildfire response. These draft assessment tools should not be construed to represent any sort of official determination or policy, and updated versions of this assessment tool are likely going to become available as both the wildfire season and knowledge about COVID-19 pandemic change. That said, this tools, or tools like it, can help shape our awareness of relative risk within a community, which can help shape our decisions about what resources we need to implement the desired tactics to inform the affected public with clear, timely, and accurate information. In this example, overall relative risk represented in box 4 on the bottom left is high. This is based on a moderate incident command post fire camp risk in box 1, a high mitigation implementation risk in box 2, and a high surrounding area and community risk in box 3. In box 1 through 3, each has 3 variables for consideration. So in box 2, the tool considers screening frequency, social distancing discipline, and wearing masks. Importantly, we, as the people who interact with the public, might find that the risk status for box 2 will likely always be high, given that the public is less likely than our fire resources to adhere to these variables. This should be a part of the discussion with the incident commander, agency administrators, and your supervisors. In this example, screening occurs sometimes and wearing masks occurs never, which hopefully isn't the case. A line is drawn between sometimes and never of these 2 variables. Where that line intersects with the 3rd variable, social distancing discipline, is the resultant risk status for box 2. Again, high in this case. The results for boxes 1 through 3 are used to complete box 4. This type of information can help shape our overall approach to the tactics we use in information, and it's akin to understanding whether we're in the WUI or city in the previous wildfire risk example. As we move to the next slide, I just ask folks, please make a comment in the chat feature if you have access. Let us know if you've seen this kind of tool before or what you think the underlying surrounding area and community risk is in your area. As mentioned previously, the risk assessment process is typically used to look at hazards related to operational tactics, but it is also used in ways that apply to everyone, including us in information. So an example is driving. Driving is dangerous, so we identify the mitigations to make driving more of an acceptable risk. We're told to drive defensively, limit nighttime driving to reduce vehicle-animal interactions, etc. In terms of using a risk assessment tool specific to information, I want to acknowledge that there are multiple efforts currently underway, one of which was developed by PNW2 dating back to 2015. Another was introduced on a recent national PIO call. Before we look closer at how these translate to the decisions we make about providing information to affected communities, let's talk for a second about trade-off analysis. A trade-off can be defined as giving up one thing to get another, or if we do X, what do we gain or lose? We can make a thoughtful or strategic decision based on understanding what the advantages and disadvantages of making that decision are. So going back to our example of wildfire risk, there are multiple factors that influence the outcome of a home survivability when confronted by wildfire. Some of these factors are weighted more than others. The roof is more important than the siding of the home, but both influence the outcome or consequences of a wildfire. If we leave a wood roof on our home, we save money. But if we spend money to change to a non-combustible metal roof, we can increase our home survivability. Understanding what we gain and lose and the advantages or disadvantages of that decision is a trade-off analysis. So I should pause here to emphasize that the risk assessment and trade-off analysis tools for information are still being developed, but public information officers and public affairs officers should not be surprised to see or hear these types of discussions on incidents this fire year and into the future. I've also put a draft of the PNW2 information risk assessment in the resources folder for this class. To think about trade-offs in a more traditional public affairs, public information context, let's think about an emerging and growing incident. Should we spend time to develop a communication strategy that guides our operation now and into the future? Or should we get the incident created in InciWeb and write a quick update, eventually coming back to write the communication strategy? There are no wrong answers, and we really don't have all the information to make a strategic decision, but this provides an example of the trade-offs that we make on incidents regularly. A visual way to see the trade-offs is a decision matrix. I should preface that the chart I'm showing is not a new NWCG, NMAC, or other fire thing. I actually stole this example of a decision matrix from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, just to demonstrate a way to see the trade-offs that we may be making this fire year. In this example, we're evaluating the personal interactions, personnel safety, and the reach of various typical daily tasks of the info shop. Each value is weighted, identifying the relative importance, and it adds to 100. The 5 tasks on the left are ranked, in this case from 1 to 5, for each of the categories across the top. I should point out that you can use ordinal ranking, low to high, high to low, cardinal weights. The results are the same as long as you're consistent in how you apply it. In my example, I chose to rank from low to high, and the cells with the red border represent the lowest scores for each criterion. The total benefit is the sum of the weighted scores, or the ranked values, multiplied by the weighted value. Again, in this case, the lower numbers are more ideal. If we choose a virtual meeting, the one that scored the lowest, then we are giving up personal attention, reaching a portion of the public, and some personnel safety, but we're gaining reaching the majority of the affected public. So if you have access to this chat feature, go ahead and comment on what percentage of the affected population is acceptable to miss in order to reduce risk to personnel. Again, there's no wrong answers, just kind of want to get some dialogue going in the chat box. So in this decision matrix example, again, it's just an example, but it helps us to clearly see the trade-offs. And in reality, we may do all or several of the tasks on this list, but at least we can see what we gain and lose by making various choices. So we can use these tools that I've shared to make strategic decisions about the work that we do in the information shop. What are the things we would like to do or need to do in order to accomplish our goals and our mission? Are they affected by the available staffing? Are they affected by local conditions? The PIOs in the Southwest identified serving the local community while incorporating COVID-19 mitigations as a challenge. They shared that some of the traditional products, like the daily update, can be cumbersome in this new environment, and there may be more effective ways at reaching affected communities. They also shared that the electronic trap line may not be as effective as in-person conversations with local residents. So using these tools that we've talked about so far, we could help demonstrate to the incident commander, agency administrator, or cooperators what the risks and trade-offs of our decisions are. So let's now take a look at the daily task list that we referenced in class 102. Here's a look at the portions of the community and media branches from the PNW2 daily task list. And here's the PNW2 information risk assessment worksheet that I just shared a minute ago. If we look at trap lines, community meetings, and press conferences, we can evaluate or assess the hazards. In this case, it might be human-to-human contact and exposure to COVID-19 without mitigations. And then in the mitigation considerations, we can add in things like using email lists to distribute the daily updates to traditional trapline locations or conduct virtual community meetings. And then we can identify that the residual risk, which is in this case now moderate rather than critical as it started out prior to any mitigations. So we've talked about risks and trade-offs in this section. And again, again, this section is not intended to provide us with all the answers, but rather to have a thoughtful conversation. Risk management is the ability to identify, evaluate, and prioritize the risks, followed by actions to reduce the probability or consequences of negative outcomes, and an understanding of what we gain or lose in making these decisions. This should not be an excuse to eliminate the things we can do with proper mitigating actions. It is also important to think about the capacity of the current or future incident management organizations and their ability to meet expectations, as well as the capabilities to deliver information. So what happens when an incident transitions from the host unit to a type 2 to a type 1 and back to the host unit? Will the information delivery change, perhaps missing key segments in the population through that process? With an understanding of these tools and concepts, you should be prepared for these kinds of conversations. Recognizing that much of the IMT risk management approach is often focused on the fire and firefighting resources, Yet in information, we primarily operate in this public sphere. So the determination about the risks and trade-offs can occur in the delegation of authority, in the incident information agreement that we introduced last week, or those functional breakouts that happen between the public affairs and public information officers. It could occur in conjunction with a change in the strategy and tactics of the incident at the planning meeting. And some of these discussions can be taking place now within the places that will be hosting incident management teams in the near future. The point is, be prepared to be thinking about how risk applies to the work that we do, what trade-offs we're making, what we can do to mitigate, and be able to have those conversations and understand that it is an important piece of the decision on how we proceed. The decision space lies with the incident commander and the agency administrator in terms of what is acceptable level of risk for the reward. However, it also lies with the resource assigned the task. So we should honor the ability for PIOs to turn down assignments. But if we do, we need to have a pace planning or a backup in order to meet the need. What are we going to do if what we're proposing isn't safe or it's not safe to the resources that are assigned to do it? What's going to be our alternative contingency or emergency plan? So I'm going to pause here now that we've talked about some high-level strategic decision conversations, had some comprehension about the advantages and disadvantages, and I just want to see if there's some questions.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody. It's Gil here. We do see a hand up from Kat. Kat, if you have your mic and can unmute it.
These look like awesome resources, and I'd love to have access to them so I can start pouring through them and maybe customizing them for our own use. And also, I think there's probably multiple people with the same questions. I just wanted to ask that early.
So here's the summary. Everybody with FireNet who's been in the first two classes, I looked at the admission list and put everybody in with their FireNet address. So the FireNet folks automatically get full access to what we call the schoolhouse, which has all the folders. For everybody else who's in a guest account, what we do is, because there's some limitations there in terms of the firewall between FireNet and your USDA or BLM accounts, even if they're Outlook accounts, we send out an email with a summary and SharePoint links, which are open access to everybody. We specifically change each link permission to make sure that you can open it, and those go out following the class. That'll include the PowerPoints, any templates, reference guides, links to folders, and that type of thing. So the best case scenario is to get a FireNet account. We do understand that Boise is very, very behind on that, but if you have one, go ahead and let me know and I'll add it.
As Cale said last week, our goal here is to make everything available to everyone so that everyone has access to it. As you mentioned, maybe using some of these templates and tools for your situation. We will get those posted in the teams. We'll share those links in SharePoint so they're available. And we're also looking at providing this information to a broader audience at the conclusion of this training designed for folks in the Northwest, Oregon, Washington.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Sarlos, and I'm going to be going over the low-tech evolved section of this Closing the Gap session. I kind of feel like the word for the 2020 fire year is innovation. So I'm going to go over just a couple ideas, and none of these are silver bullets. Again, we understand this year is different, but maybe just some ideas that you can take and make your own and customize. But these are just some of the ideas that we're thinking about for going into this fire season. So pop-up community briefings, simple podcast, fire updates, tactical information placement, and virtual voice technology. So this season, we will be connecting in non-traditional methods. Or maybe we can think about it that we're just evolving our original toolbox to lessen exposure for safety. This evolution could possibly, just throwing it out there, could make our methods more effective and efficient for the future. PNW2 has been using the simple communication strategy of high-tech, low-tech for a balanced approach to incident information distribution. So what is that? What's the high-tech, low-tech? So high tech is platforms like websites, social media, basically information that is on a computer or a mobile device. The low tech is the other end of the spectrum, and that's going to be our signboards, any sort of physical community engagement, public meetings, phone centers, and radio. So let's cover evolving the low tech. Okay, what does closing the gap mean? Right, that was the title of this learning session. So on the left is a photo of our traditional public meeting, right, that we all know and love. And then on the right, we have kind of what we've got going on now, the new virtual public meeting. Luckily, we've been using a hybrid of the traditional public meeting and using live stream technology for the last couple years. Live streaming has increased access and distribution of information to a broader audience and has assisted during times of, say, like road closures or evacuations when maybe some of the public couldn't actually go and attend the physical public meeting, but we were able to get it to them via Facebook Live or other streaming methods. So I'm really glad that we had this head start to this tech tool that has helped us be more prepared for this current fire season. I can't even imagine what it would be like if we hadn't been experimenting with live streaming and those virtual tools, and then being in this sort of environment that we're in now. That'd be a big leap. But I think, I'm thinking that we all agree that a purely virtual public meeting isn't the ultimate, right? And it can increase the gap between us as communicators and the community. So what we're going to go over is how we can close that gap. Okay, so here's a possible solution. And just right out of the gate, a lot of this isn't going to fit all solutions or all situations. It's just an idea. But let's call it community connection 2.0. Again, going back to, taking what we know has worked in the past and just up-leveling it. So this is, these two pictures that you see here is what I'm calling a pop-up community briefing. So in that lower picture, you see it's a stand-up sort of briefing. It's outside. It's a small group of critically impacted neighborhood, and it's super simple. Notice I called it a briefing and not a meeting. So hopefully a briefing is brief, but we've all seen briefings go pretty long too. So, and this was last summer, just for reference, up in Fairbanks, Alaska. I like to call this type of briefing the Fremont, and why? It's named after the smoke jumper who actually was the first IC on the fire before the IMT was ordered. And he actually was from the impacted community. So the community that was real close to the fire and evacuated. And he really understood the limited internet connection and remote factors that played into information distribution. So he transitioned into being a div soup when the team came in on the fire, and he kind of went rogue and set up this briefing up at the corner on the top of this hill of the two dirt roads, and he made that cardboard sign, and and he was ready to roll, like without kind of tying in with anyone. The ops chief got the word that this was happening and informed me, that this was happening. So I headed up with some fire updates and some handout maps to assist. This briefing, just so you know, it wasn't advertised on Facebook or any other like normal ways that we'd be advertising this. It was just that awesome cardboard sign that you see there. And overall, the briefing went well. The audience there is a fully off-grid sort of community. No internet. A lot of them just do their own power and haul water. And they really appreciated the information because they were the next section to be evacuated. So I kind of, if you look at that lower picture, I imagine that sort of situation, but with more physical distancing, mask, and those sort of mitigations. And so some things to consider if you're thinking about maybe doing this specialized briefing for the critical neighborhood. Having the div soup there and 2 PIOs, it was just me. So, you know, learning, I would have brought 2 people. The thing that I did let folks know is I informed them where they could get more information after this briefing, and we ended up putting a signboard up there, and that was very helpful to them because, again, it was low tech. But also let them know like where the social media was at, what they would be hearing on the radio, and then also at their local post office. If there was 2 PIOs there, then maybe someone could have videoed the briefing on a phone, just a real simple setup, and that would have kind of made a hybrid of that briefing. It was really short. It was only about 15 minutes with Q&A. Another up-leveling I would have done is brought a portable lapel mic and a speaker to provide better sound for some of the folks in the back. And like when a 4-wheeler would drive by or a plane would fly over, it got kind of hard to hear. So just like increasing that sound. And if you want to go super low tech, you could, you know, just have a megaphone. The one thing is, it's really important to set expectations about these special situations. And again, direct people to other sources of incident information for their future needs. Okay, Operation Ears. So, you know, unfortunately, I've been guilty of moving my attention to the new shiny social media and Facebook Live and not prioritizing radio. You know, when I started being a public information officer, some of my first interviews were to radio stations, right? That's kind of how you cut your teeth with interviews is to the radio station. But it's easy to not prioritize radio, and radio really is the ultimate low tech way of getting information out to the public. People can be listening in their cars when they're driving to work, or say if they're evacuating, they can have the radio on and they can get that information. Or if the power's out, a lot of folks have, you know, one of those emergency radios in their homes for all hazard sort of situations. So the radio really is such a strong tool. So consider prioritizing local radio interviews and strengthening that relationship to strike a balance of that high tech, low tech that we talked about before. So radio is low tech, but is there a way that we can make it a hybrid product? So what I mean by that is that it's, you know, it's primarily, it's just an audio, but is there a way that we can, again, up-level it? We've seen how when we post quality photos or videos online on either our Facebook pages or IncyWeb, that the local news stations will pick up those photos and videos and incorporate them into their news stories. What about if we make simple recordings of the fire update or press releases, whatever you want to call them, to then be shared online via social media or email linked to local radio stations? So an example of that is a couple years ago, it was like 2014, 15. we had a lot of fires in the southwest of Alaska. And so it's super remote. If you look at the map, there's no roads over there at all. But a lot of villages and a lot of lightning that starts fires. So anyhow, we had a lot of fires over there, and I was doing public information, and that area of Alaska it's called the Mukluk radio. And so basically what that is a radio station where people can share personal messages to their families or coworkers. Like the Smith family is loading up their boat and heading to Tanana on Sunday, right? And then so everyone hears that. It's for safety, it's for networking. So what we did was I recorded a fire update just using my phone and the voice memo app. And I also actually got, because the fires were burning on U.S. Fish and Wildlife land, we've got a UPIC recording from a U.S. Fish and Wildlife employee that spoke UPIC of the fire update as well. And it wasn't a super long update. It was just, pretty short, like, hey, this is a fire that's near your village. This is how big it is. This is what we're doing with it. And so we both did that recording, and then we shared it on social media, and then also the MP3s to that local radio, that Mukluk radio station. And then they played it over their airwaves. And it really had it covered a lot of ground, and we got a lot of good feedback. But like sometimes you have these good ideas and you try these new things, and then again, the new shiny new thing shows up, and you forget that you ever did that. So that this is one thing that I think that we can maybe explore this year. Okay, so early this spring, I was researching about setting up a podcast due to having so much extra time on my hands these last couple months. So while I was Googling and researching, I came across the definition, which I found interesting. The dictionary definition of a podcast is a digital audio file made available on the internet for downloading to a computer or mobile device. And then, typically it's a series or new installments, which can be received by subscribers automatically. So the term podcast is actually and I butcher this word all the time, so I'm going to ask Kale. Can you pronounce that, Kale, for me?
Oui, je parle un petit de français. Portmanteau.
Awesome. Thanks, Kale. So basically, it's a mashup of an iPod. Remember the iPod days? An iPod and a broadcast. So that's why it's called a podcast. And, I had no idea what that word was that Kale just said. And so I had to look that word up. And I think it's just kind of fun to learn new words. So, like I said, it's basically a mashup of two words, like how breakfast and lunch is brunch, or our own INCI is incident and website mashed together. So here's a picture of my basic setup. But, really all you need is a phone with a voice memo app and a laptop and a hosting location, and we'll go over that. So you see the kind of the fancy mic or whatever, that is really nice to have, and they're pretty inexpensive, but it's not needed. So next slide. Okay, so I would just say, try it out. Maybe send an audio message to a family member or friend. We all agree that it's way easier to learn in the comfort of our own home or office before an incident. And you play like you practice. So practice, practice, practice. Here's a couple of easy steps to posting a voice recording. So I've got record, post, share, feedback. What does that mean? So record. So you would, after the fire update is created, you would open your voice memo app on an iPhone or other phone device. And you could advance your that process, like in that last screen where you saw I had like the microphone. And then you could use GarageBand or Audacity. Those are two other programs, and I've got the links to those. And GarageBand is just something that comes with if you own a Mac. But it's an audio processing software. But again, not needed. That's only if you want to advance the process. So you record it on your voice memo app in something pretty easy, and then you post it on a online hosting site like Buzzsprout, SoundCloud, and that provides different sharing options. And then 3, you share. So that online hosting, you have ability to do direct sharing to social media or a link that then can be emailed. And maybe, you could have that link on your FireNet update. FireNet, geez, it's because we say it all the time, your Fire update. And, like how you would send out an email that had your Fire update, your map, and then maybe a link to that audio. Or if you can condense it down enough, you could send the MP3 as well. And then 4, feedback. Consider virtual or remote PIOs to either create this product or monitor this product. And another consideration is, again, that it could be maybe done in a different language, like I did it in Yupik, more to respect the culture that was being impacted by that fire. Most everyone spoke English in the village, but it was burning in Yupik native allotments, and so that's why I chose to do that. But so that's another thing that you can do to kind of again up-level that recording. Okay, next slide. Okay, so after hearing Chris's presentation about risk assessment, we understand that our methods of community outreach will be different this year due to new risk, due to exposure for our PIOs in public. This is why we really need to think about where we're putting information, what we're putting up, why we're putting up, maybe when we're putting up, the frequency, and how we are putting it up when we post our information around the community that is being impacted by the incident. And I love a good acronym. So I came up with the tactical information placement. And partly because it helps me remember these ideas. And then also, so like when I'm teaching or, we're bringing people into the fold, it's easy to remember. So tactical information placement tip. So maybe going into this season, you can, when you're thinking about where you're going to put information up, or if you're thinking about doing a modified trap line, you could think about tip, okay, where am I putting this up? When am I putting up? And kind of go through that process. So here's 2 examples for how to close the gap by updating traditional distribution methods and bringing new tools to help inform our public. So on the left, we've got your trapline log. A lot of you have seen this, and I believe it's more important than ever for physical tracking of resources, and it could also be used for virtual posts, but just really being able to gather that data efficiently. You could also kind of preload this before the incident. Public affairs staff could get a trapline log up of some pre-incident determined locations that have agreed to like maybe receive an email to their establishment, and then that they would print it out and slap it up on their door or whatever. So that could, be another way that this tool could be used for PIOs and PAOs. So that's the left. And on the right, we've got the Nextdoor app. And I think some of you might be familiar with Nextdoor. It's a neighborhood virtual hub, basically, that connects the neighborhood, and it just helps exchange information. We use it up here a lot. I'm on a pretty active Nextdoor app community, a lot of retirees, and they're always letting everyone know when there's a moose in the alley and for safety and things like that. So, but it can also be used for incident information. So it can be used, and it just recently was used by the Southwest Incident Management Team. The local Office of Emergency Center had coordinated community liaisons via the Homeowners Association that they would receive the fire update and a map from the email distribution list and then post that on the app. And the nice thing also about this platform, it tends to be more neutral than other social media platforms. So going back to the tip, so strategic locations. I think it's important now to just kind of start thinking about where are some of those strategic locations and what are the priority posts. I really like to fall back on, the existing agency boards that are either in front of the building or in front of the district office or used for overall, recreation information or in front of volunteer fire department stations. Those boards people are used to going to and they're already established. And then possibly the posting could be done by the frontliners. If it's coordinated, I would say it would be kind of nice if it was coordinated with the public affairs before the incident. Another place I'd love to have on the list is the post office. So either internal of the post office or a board that sits in the parking lot. It has to be approved, of course. But I'm just a big fan of posting at post offices. You go to the smallest towns and villages, they have a zip code. So even if that post office is like in a store or, like they're one little building, and really no matter like what side of the fence you're on, the post office seems to be neutral territory too, for information. So just put it out there. That's my little soapbox about post offices. Also consider local government or CERT personnel to post on boards. And then again, public affairs could, look kind of deeper in their bench of maybe some non-fire personnel, such as rec staff and others that could help with some of the postings. But I think, again, the more that you could have the conversations before the fire hits of just hey, if we get a fire in our district or on our forest or on our unit, would you guys be willing to post in these areas when you're out on your, doing your daily business? Just an idea. I also would consider not marinating at these boards like what we used to do, say sometimes at some of these busier signboards, we would like post up to people that would hang out there for a couple hours and just talk to people and engage. That's just going to risk the exposure, even if you are wearing mask and everything. So again, instead of just painting the town with our updates and maps, like I feel like at least that was my approach, and maybe it was a little bit of a shotgun approach. Let's try to be strategic and think about the why and where we are posting, when, the frequency, does it have to be updated every day there? Maybe, maybe not. How are we doing it with the PIOs, or are we outsourcing it? And what we're posting, is it relevant? Looking at each location with the lens of a risk versus reward approach should increase effectiveness and efficiency and promote less exposure. Okay. So this is a fun one, virtual voice technology. So basically the phone, that's a fancy way of saying phone calls. We understand that people want to talk to humans, and maybe even more so because they won't be seeing us hang out around town to have that personal interaction with our PIOs. Consider building up the ability to answer phone calls with a virtual phone number, such as, we've used Google Voice in the past, and I have heard that FireNet has an option, but we haven't used that yet, to be able to meet the possible increase in need. The public number and media, I would do two. I would have a public number and then a media number, which we used to call the bat line. I think it would be effective for PIO task delegation too, to have two different numbers that way. And another thing to consider, which a lot of us already have, but that using the virtual voice message. So when you set up a virtual phone number, you can also have a message that plays if no one picks up, right? Like our old school answering machines. And you would set that up for overflow call volume. And another just idea is possibly having a virtual PIO in different time zones that would be available for public calls, either in the early morning or late night, to kind of handle those shoulder times too. And just kind of using the time zone, time warp bit for our advantage. So those are some ideas that can evolve our toolbox. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the innovative ways that public affairs and PIOs will advance in incident information in this fire year. I feel like it's forced us to be more innovative. And I really believe, and I'm not trying to be all silver lining here, but I think that it will really strengthen this community that we have with us that are within public affairs and public information, and also really shore up our tools for the future. And that's what I have. So thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah. So, okay, I'll go ahead and we're just going to pause again. Just as a reminder for how we do questions, please use the chat feature. If you don't have access, raise your hand and we'll work through those. I know that there was some lined up from before. So, okay, I'll hand it back to you to do the questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. We did have a cat question, a Catherine Caruso question, or hand up again. If you have one, Catherine.
Yeah, sorry to be so greedy with the question. I just wanted, for Nextdoor, I know Nextdoor is pretty location specific. I think you answered my question in that you worked through the local emergency management office to kind of coordinate with a network of volunteers to get information onto that platform. I didn't know if there was another method for us to request access to that app if we're, for example, coming into a fire from another location and we don't have a local address to use or get verified for the sign up.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Kat. And I feel like this is something that, you want it coming from trusted sources, and people trust their neighbors more than us coming into the community, right? And so that is, if maybe the local EOC hasn't set that up, that could be part of that conversation with them. Suggesting that, and it's a that tip, if you will, came in through the Southwest Incident Management Team through Katie O'Hara, and she said that it was very successful. So I just wanted to be able to share that in this presentation, and I feel like I saw it work, like when we had the earthquake and others ways up here. Sometimes the EOC, the community EOC or the city EOC also is able to post directly onto Nextdoor app as well. So that's a nice little booster. And it's not coming from the fire, but say if there was an evacuation, they're able to be able to provide that sort of information on that platform.
All right, great. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Catherine. And just to review the chat screen, for those of you who can't see it, earlier in Sarah's piece about speaker systems at the 2.0 community briefing, the stand-up briefing, Shannon O'Brien mentioned the tech for a small sound system speaker in the reasonably priced zone that would use Bluetooth or some sort of mic. And so what I replied to Shannon is I will look that up. I know that teams in the Southwest, as we observe their process, are using a lot of projection because people are speaking through masks when they speak to cameras that then relay the meeting to the other folks virtually. So just like at a stand-up outside meeting, that sound system would work well for also a day-to-day operations in the virtual world. And thanks for that, Shannon. And then John Miller had a comment, survey 123 can help establish trapline locations and related pertinent data. So for those of you who didn't see John's comment, and John, if you're on and just want to give a 1 minute on that, you feel free to unmute now. Okay, and in the chat, there are no more questions. I don't see hands up, but I will give some time and space here for folks who might have a question on what they just saw here.
Hey, Cale, this is Chris. Just wanted to go back to, I think it was Josie's comment about the sound system, and just share. I know we have a resource in one of the folders with some examples of some tech that you can get low cost, different versions of low budget, high budget. One thing that I use just on Amazon is an Anchor Sound Core 2. You can get one, they Bluetooth, you can use your phone, you can get an inexpensive mic. The nice thing about that, as I was sharing with Cale and Sarah recently, was that if you buy two of those speakers, those Bluetooth speakers, they can connect to each other. So that's helps set up you can put those in the background of a Fremont meeting that you might set up, or even in a large conference room if we're inside together ever again. So I just wanted to mention there's some great resources, inexpensive, that you can find online.
Great, and then another comment on the Nextdoor piece. Josie Williams mentioned that she is a lead that will help on Nextdoor. And Josie, if you're on and want to just clarify that. I know I'm putting folks in the spot here.
Okay, so I work as a lead for Nextdoor, one of three. Usually they have three, and their names and email addresses are available, so you can actually identify those folks. We have a fire department that sends us updated emergency information about burning or whatever, and then with this COVID thing, we've had emergency management do the same. So you can actually work through those leads very easily, and they can actually help you post where you can't see what other people are saying, but you can post information.
That's great. Awesome. Thanks, Josie. I always kind of wondered, like, I was like, there's people here that are in charge of it within my neighborhood. So thank you. Now that kind of helps solve that mystery. And
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, we do that here with the fire department. People were concerned at first, can they see what we're saying, whatever, and no, that we can just, what Nextdoor does is allow them to have access to post information, and people just are able to read it.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think that it's we're just, a lot of people maybe already had that in their toolbox, but we're just able to kind of figure it out a little bit more, and then be also able to share it as a tool moving forward.
Kale?
All right, great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks there. And thanks, Holly Craig, who is the program director for our program, for putting on this training, and everybody who's here staying through to the second hour. My name is Cale Casey. I'm with the Alaska team and Pacific Northwest Team 2. I sort of specialize in the media side, but really my passion is community connection and finding ways that we can include more of the community. I love the topic that we're diving into here. With the recent justice movements, you might see different ways of people referring to EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we're going to cover how this spring informed us to learn more about it, how we've referred to this in the past in FIRE, and going forward, building off of what Chris and Sarah have talked about, how we can all express who we are as people by bringing in more of the folks that are going to be impacted by smoke this year. So you might see folks write DEI, diversity, inclusion, equity. You might now see them after the George Floyd murder and all the issues there with the justice part of it too. So that way you're not caught blindsided if you're involved in a conversation with somebody who brings up the JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. My favorite Latin expression is res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. Inclusion, bringing people in, making them feel welcome. No barriers so that they can fully participate and that they feel that. Equity, again, no barriers at all. Diversity, covering the whole range of population. And if COVID taught us one thing, it's that there is truly an event in this nation, in this world, that can affect and impact the lives of every single person in your state, region, country, nation, on planet. Let's talk about what we've already been doing, and maybe you can make some associations so this brings it home to you. In INCIWeb, when you have to upload the images and get stuck because the INCIWeb puts those red boxes there, you're filling out the alternate and title descriptions for the blind and visually impaired. On YouTube and Facebook, when YouTube especially will automatically close caption for you, and when you hear about the 508 compliance, that's for viewers who are deaf or have difficulty hearing. For the daily updates, when you're using charts, tables, and photos, when they're printed and put up in and around town and posted, you're actually including visual learners or folks with limited English proficiency who might just be able to ascertain the numbers or get an idea through the pictures what's going on. You're seeing more and more public meetings, American Sign Language interpreters. Of course, it's law down in Arizona, so with Michelle and Bree and the other folks who are out there, you'll see it constantly the last couple of weeks, and we'll see it more as Region 3 continues to heat up. And then you've probably been on an incident. For a lot of you, if you went to the Sobranos fire, it was absolutely required to have translation services and a Spanish-speaking PIO as well. That was an agency administrator requirement for every of the 5 teams that came through. So we're already doing some of this equity, diversity, inclusion, and now we can talk about moving forward. So what informed us this year is that Pacific Northwest Team 2 was hired by the kind of EOC, FEMA Unified Command to come in and help them with some strategic analysis as they were taking on the unbelievable distribution of PPE and all the chaos the Unified Command brings. Sarah, Chris, and I, and Jen Berger in the information section, we got to do a deep dive into the Joint Information Center there. Joint Information Center in Washington State stood up at the end of January after the Kirkland fatalities, and in some form right now is still operating, but really peaked all through March and April with the complete lockdown. We got to learn that they have an incredibly robust, talented, and highly motivated crew there. They have a community engagement branch that is made up of EDI professionals from the agencies within the state. They were incredibly dedicated to reaching all the people there. And one in particular, Paj Nandi, in the SharePoint, when this PDF is sent to you an email, you'll be able to click and listen to a 13-minute EDI overview that Paj gave to the Joint Information Center all call. And some of you folks were most likely on that call if you were part of a Joint Information Center in March. It was outstanding. We'll also make this document that we did of the analysis of the JIC and their lessons learned and how they did their community outreach that included all the equity, diversity, inclusion techniques and their accessibility program. So you can download that again once this presentation is over. At the towards the end, I left mid-April. I was there 30 days. At the end of April, working in conjunction with the governor's office, which is the Joint Information Center's job, Department of Health, Governor Inslee, working together. They influenced this so much that Governor Inslee passed a initiative on April 30th. You can see it here, so that there would be funding at the state level so that all folks, all agencies would have funding and ability to translate everything into the designated languages. Now, the community outreach group there on the wall at the Joint Information Center had over 40 languages identified. And so if you'll be able to download this on SharePoint as well, so you can see in there, it made every group receiving federal funding required. Now that doesn't necessarily apply to us on fire. I'm not trying to say that we fall into this COVID plan, but it's a good example of the states we're working in, what the leader's intent. So in Washington State, Governor Inslee's intent, and you know how Governor Inslee likes to come to our fire camps and meet with the information officers. It'd be good if you're doing a briefing there, to make note of what you've done this year to meet this intent. Again, this will be on SharePoint. Okay, we talked about the mutual aid part of classes 102 and 103. And the concept all throughout this is that when we did our survey results, we know folks are stressed. We know that the public affairs officers and PIOs are both needing to work together. And this is a little bit of a mutual aid. On the public affairs officer side, you can determine those language translations and ASL needs. And we're expanding out our area now this year because COVID patients or patients who are susceptible to COVID, smoke is a huge factor, and it will cause additional fatalities this year. That is just a fact. Wildfire smoke is killing thousands. That's becoming more publicized. And now with COVID, we're going to see that increase. So you've got to expand your area of operation and where we're thinking about with the downwind effects of smoke. You can research the historical use of ASL in your area and translation services, and then include your expectations and recommendations for the incoming lead PIO and their IC in the delegation of authority, so that the agency administrator, public affairs officer, incident commander, and lead PIO are all on the same page from day one. And that, for all of us involved in the receiving end, breaks down any barriers to get financial codes or to even have a further discussion as to whether it's warranted or not. I've unfortunately, like you, probably sat through enough of those discussions of whether Spanish translation or American Sign Language is warranted or not. Those discussions need to end. It's up to us and the actions that we take. We have tools, we need to use them, and it shows who we are as people. For public information officers, we need to think more about ordering those remote or on-site ASL interpreters for meetings. We need to be thinking about assigning more folks to those 508 subtitles and getting those done timely manner, even broadening our horizons to think about anything we print in color schemes and how that might be affecting the blind. And then, of course, messaging to the limited English proficiency groups. We'll touch on some of these again down the road. So for the 2000 season, what am I going to do? What are we going to do? We're definitely going to look at more language translations. Jim Whittington, who's one of our subject matter experts presenting tomorrow in the incident within an incident class, was on the Gorge Fire. He did an interview with a Russian TV station because there's a significant population of Russian speakers in Portland. We're not just referring to Spanish speakers. The Joint Information Center, again, made a list of almost 3.5 dozen languages. They determined which groups do childcare. Okay, so Somali and Spanish-speaking people in Washington are childcare. So when they're messaging about childcare, they knew they had to do more work for Somali speakers to bring them in. We need to do more assessment. And again, we can do that in a mutual aid setting. We need to add more Google Voice lines. We should never be thinking anymore about just one Google Voice line. We should be thinking about a second Google Voice line for that population speaking a different language, so we can get somebody on board to help us leave either every few days messages or ideally every day. These are tools to put in the toolkit. Again, I mentioned Sobranos Fire. There was required that every single daily update was completed by a Spanish-speaking public information officer. If you've been watching the Southern California, LA County COVID updates, they go right from English into Spanish. That virtual PIO outreach is super important. That's where we can start using people who are at home, who aren't doing trapline like they used to, who have the time on their hands from their home environment. And we'll touch on that as we talk about tribal entities and immigrant populations here in a minute. And then, as Sarah said, we're going to build on that virtual voice technology, those AM, FM radio updates in different languages. So in the COVID era, and what motivated, of course, everybody in the Joint Information Center in Washington, and what motivates all of us, is we know that there are especially key audiences this year who have underlying health issues, who are at the absolute greatest risk for COVID. Physiologically, we're looking at that inflammation of the lung tissue, causing pneumonia, air hunger, and respiratory arrest. For that population, we're looking at that age group again, those radio updates, the local access TV, call lists for community outreach, and then Facebook Live and YouTube. Significant amount of demographics of the, especially females, because we look at our Live at 5 stats, and we know that between 55 and 75, we have a huge number of females who are participating in the Live at 5, and they're communicating that in the community. So don't forget that even though they might be considered in that underlying concern age group, that's still very effective tool. So right there is a low-tech, high-tech balance approach. So for our indigenous populations, we often assume that indigenous, that First Nation peoples, tribal folks are English speakers. But what I learned more this winter working with Paj and the crew there is that there are often challenges in receiving information. The key point in this slide is in yellow. This is to contact the tribal liaison for advice on how to serve a particular tribe or group. And then it should be noted that the strategy I think that will work the best is that the on-site PIO lead or deputy is the most likely person, whether it's at an informal or formal cooperator meeting or some sort of virtual meeting, to make that relationship and then ideally explain the intent. We want to make sure we're serving your tribe. We want to make sure we're meeting your expectations for information on both fire movement, smoke, and resource impacts. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign one of my public information officers at home or in a virtual setting to be your daily contact or to be your emergency point of contact. And then you can nurture, manage, and hand off that relationship. Remember, these folks are sovereign nations, and as such, they always and will forever have direct contact with the governor's office. So working with your public affairs officer, you can make sure you have a good, solid plan before you start moving forward. For our immigrant populations, they fall into the limited English proficiency group. In COVID-19 in Chelan County, big example, the picking sheds had an outbreak. There were requirements, essential worker requirements to keep the food chain alive. There's all sorts of issues going on. And so the community engagement branch really turned it up and started developing anything from cartoons to coloring books to anything that they learned from communicating with the specialists, coordinating with the specialists in that population group to help understand how the people would be learning, reading, and understanding the COVID risks. For us, it's the same challenge. How are we going to explain the evacuations, closures, and smoke impacts? And not necessarily that we're going to develop all those tools, but we want to be at least discussing with a refugee population specialist or an immigrant population specialist to make sure we're being as inclusive as possible. And if we find good ways we can reach, then a home-based virtual PIO, again, can have a set of tasks. And the lesson learned all throughout the spring that we constantly received, and it was not just in this group, but in a lot of groups, including in Mason County, where Norma works and provided a great report throughout our trainings this year. Many groups feel more comfortable with their trusted figures in their communities speaking to them. We know that from fire, but in this year, as we reach more folks, it's going to become even more important. Trust is something we need to hold on to when we have it. We need to work hard to build it. And when these leaders already have it, we need to, again, stay connected. And it's almost like this year might be somewhat easier in this respect, because when we're on site, there's so many different meetings and meeting cycles and lunch breaks and all these things going on that it's hard to kind of keep all this in one set of to-dos. And now that we're having folks at home, we can do better tracking, monitoring, assigning. And there are folks within our PIO family who are going to be good at this, who are going to take this on and want to be good at this. And that's another part of this. Well, they'll put their heart into it, and this truly is a heart-centered job. So we have our translation challenges that that directly tied to trust, accuracy. when the Washington EOC JIC did their translations, they made sure every single one had a third-party review. Now, this was at a much more enormous scale. We're talking highway billboards and all these printed materials that they had budgets of up to $1 million+ to do these outreach campaigns. So there was that part of it, but it was also that trust. You do want your information going out in a foreign language to be not just Google Translate. That's really not acceptable. It has to be reviewed by an actual person who speaks the language. And then just a caution on availability. During the March, April, everybody having a press conference, Department of Health, every agency, all hands on deck, the translation services were strained. They were overloaded. And so new folks, new entrepreneurs, enterprises started to pop up, but just don't necessarily assume, depending on where we go this summer with the COVID issue. And of course, Yakima's sending patients to Seattle right now. They are maxed out. So don't start assuming that it will be necessarily easy. Let's check our capacity, keep that in our pace modeling, and start looking at how to ensure that we have these services as needed. So I highlighted in yellow here, you don't have to read all this. This is just messaging for accessibility, some basic principles. Again, we touched on the appropriate color schemes, but it does matter. Retain those services, retain them, hold on to them. Once you get them, hold on to them for the rest of the summer if you can. Creating content to a low reading level. And we have brilliant writers, and I've worked with just fabulous writers, and I always aspire to be a better writer. But I'm constantly reminded by some of our folks on our team, Mark Staples being a great one, is always like, remember, low reading level, simple, keep it simple, plain language, don't use complicated medical terms. And that really is one way we can get a little more inclusion to our limited English proficiency. And then monitoring, constant monitoring. That's, again, something that people at home who are looking for those deeper parts of their day to fill in their schedule. And then that's where we can also consider the VOST, the Virtual Operations Support Team. Now, Marlita Yemfeld, she presented last week at Modern Media. There's a link right there to the SharePoint folder for that. And then the PowerPoint and video for that will be available soon. Okay, here's your example from Washington State. This would be their big web portal, and you can see the multilingual resources. They put energy into translating the entire web portal. And these web portals had up to 400 to 500 links, charts, everything into those language groups. That's how seriously they took it. And you have a link to that portal there, so you can go check it out yourself. They also did the Spanish language blog, the Bienestar Washington. There's a link there on medium.com. And they had a specific set of public information officers who it was their day job to do this normally, but they absolutely made sure that they were matching or at least trying to keep up with the amount of information and making sure they're conveying that importance of staying home. That became a real nuanced challenge to keep people home. The blog was very effective. Here's an example of Operation Ears at Work. This is the podcast for the Department of Health. You can see it's in Spanish and it's just on SoundCloud. So you'll be able to click that link and go to SoundCloud, create your own account, and then you can start taking your smartphone, getting your voice memos, and uploading. You'll start to see. When you break it down like Sarah did, this is really actually basic. It doesn't matter if it's a wildly popular podcast you listen to all the time or just your voice memo. It's break it down simple. Get your voice or get somebody's voice with an update to a place people can access it, and then those radio stations, other folks can share that all around. Okay, this looks kind of, if you take a quick look at this, you're like, what is Cal sharing here? So in my phone, I make contacts for the things that are the most important things in my life. One of the most important things in my life is making sure that when we put out a video, that we're using both Facebook and YouTube. And that's part of being inclusive. As much as Facebook is great because of the engagement, and it's great because it's simple, and we have 5 winners from last week that I'm going to announce soon, who created their own dummy page, did their own live, got it right. Congratulations to you all. You're on your way now. Facebook is simple. But what we do is we immediately download it. We go over to a YouTube account that we've created. or it's a fire account. Like last year, it used to be, included with FireNet. This year, it'll be in coordination with the public affairs officer, and just to make sure that the naming conventions are correct. And then we upload to YouTube. Well, there's two reasons. Again, it's inclusive. There's a lot of folks who don't like Facebook and will watch on YouTube and they'll subscribe. It's also a channel you can put your B-roll of your best firefighting images, your best helicopter drops, your best little short clips that tell your story for you. It's also where the media loves to embed that right in their stories. And most importantly for the folks of us who have to do the tech side of this is that the captioning program within YouTube is far superior to Facebook. And when we first launched our Live at 5 a couple years ago, the Oregon State Fire Marshals were there. We were sharing a camp, sharing the experience of trying to get this thing off the ground. And we quickly realized as soon as it was done, it was getting so many views and so many shares, which was the idea. We wanted to include the early risers. We want to include people who are awake in bed and worried and sitting there at 4:30, evacuated. We wanted to include them, but we also wanted to caption for them, and we needed to get that done quickly. So as soon as I was done, we put the stop, or whoever put the stop, because we traded roles, then we had somebody assigned to get in there and at least fix the first minute on Facebook. Now, that's about as much as you want to do because it's so frustrating to work in. Then you upload to YouTube. When you get done in YouTube and you download the SRT file, here's the contact now. This is where this comes in. I'll email this to anybody, send it to anybody. You have to rename it. This is the crux. And I've gotten a lot of survey feedback of like, just show us things that get people stuck. Well, this is what gets people stuck. You work in YouTube, you've got your caption file how you want it, or your person who's in the media sections doing all that, and they say, oh my gosh, now what do I do? Well, what you do is download it, you change it to captions.en_US as you see there in the black, and just by renaming it, you could name it anything .en_US SRT. When you go back to Facebook and you click upload caption file, boom, syncs perfectly. You've now done a huge time saver. Both videos are 508 compliant. Both are doing different things. The Facebook Live is getting that engagement. Ideally, as these big complex fires happen this summer in Oregon, Washington, we can work with Facebook to get some geofencing around our pages so we can capture more people with emergency alerts. It's a very effective tool we haven't tried yet, but Chris Rietman-Oberdon from the Department of Washington has indicated that there's a chance this year. She has some contacts there. But then, okay, we got that audience, great. But let's then, of course, keep that YouTube audience going and keep that B-roll campaign strong. Okay, that is the formal end of the equity, diversity, inclusion. I know I get fired up about it. It's one of the passions for being here is hopefully that people sleep better at night when they're evacuated and they have things going on. If you have personal sidebar questions that are like, intense or personal, feel free to message me directly. We are going to have questions here soon, but I wanted to walk you through some resources. So we have a link in SharePoint there to the example of the trapline log. The risk assessment worksheet will be in the folder. We have an entire resource folder in SharePoint where you can read the entire plan from the Washington EOC specialist, and you can have that 13-minute recording. And there's some other tools in there. And then there's your podcast hosting resources from Buzzsprout and audacityteam.org. And Sarah included the how to save voice memos in the Mac as audio files. So I will go ahead and open it back up to Chris and Sarah for questions.
All right, and actually, Cale, before we get to questions, I just wanted to say there are some next steps, and I want to talk about where we're going from here. I'm going to revisit the syllabus real quick to look at tomorrow's class and the simulation for next week. But before we do, as we did last week, you have some homework for tonight. So we will ask that you fill out the course evaluation form, and I believe that's being shared in the chat. We'll make sure it gets mailed out for folks that don't have access to it. But again, that's just an opportunity to provide us, the cadre, some feedback about the experience here with the courses, any comments or questions you might want to share with us. So we do look forward to that.
I just want to kind of pitch again what we covered with getting your, registering for the simulation coming up, because we do want to make it usable, and relevant. So knowing kind of how how you're coming into the class, like what level of PIO you are, or if you're public affairs, and some of the questions that we have on the form. It's really important that we get that information, because we are totally in the development part of the simulation. All these all these classes we've been doing, I mean, it's basically just been there was no template, right? We're just it's just-in-time training, seeing the gaps and being able to give some ideas for you all, but then also for us, and hopefully tools that we'll be able to use. So just another pitch on getting your name in there for the simulation, because basically it's like everything that, if you've been watching these videos, you watch all these videos, and then really you'll be able to flex that knowledge during the simulation. So I'm just putting it out there again. Let's get those names in there.
So we've been talking about, as Sarah said, developing the training to make it the best possible training we can for y'all. We wanted to stay true to FireNet as a best practice, because we're going to be using it. And again, I know there's been some challenges as people are getting familiar, getting access. However, we've made the determination for the simulation next week that we're going to be conducting that in Zoom. And there's a number of reasons why. The main one is that we feel like the breakouts are going to work out a little bit better so that we can get those groups that Sarah talked about. Once we know who's coming into it, we can get good groups who can help have good discussions from different experiences and different perspectives. But we can have those breakouts with those folks, looking at all the material we've done over the last week and this week. And we can do that probably more efficiently in Zoom. So when you get the invite for class 301, it will be for a Zoom link next week, and that should reduce some of those challenges. As far as signing up for the survey, Kale, I think you're going to be able to send that out to folks who aren't seeing the link in the chat box, so that they can fill out the survey at the end of today and also after tomorrow as well. Is that correct?
Absolutely, Chris. And we've been trying to not over email bomb you because of the strain of information that we know everybody's under. So this morning an email went out. If you thought you were signed up for our team, there are 180 email addresses on our team and you didn't get it, then please send me a message so I can help you troubleshoot that. But we will send out links to the surveys and all these things, and I will get that out at the end of shift today. So check your inbox for that. And good question. Thanks.
All right, I appreciate it, everybody. I know it's been, there's been a lot of material, as Sarah mentioned earlier. Thank you for your attention and your time today, as well as your time last week if you were able to attend those classes. We really look forward to seeing you for the next class tomorrow, again, 1 Pacific. We're going to be talking about it's not if, it's when, and looking at some incident within an incident content. So really look forward to Jim's presentation tomorrow. Sarah, Kale, and my contact info is included on this slide. If you want to reach out to us, you can also use the Teams environment to chat with the cadre and others in the class. But again, thank you for your time. We will get the recording out and share this stuff with you. And again, Sarah, Kale, any closing messages from you guys?
Just really grateful for everybody participating. It's encouraging. We get your emails, we get your feedback, and it's just this is what keeps us bonded together and psychologically intact, right? I need you, and hopefully you need me, and that's how this works.
Yeah, I would just tag along what Kayla just said. It's a good opportunity. Nothing like being more prepared for the fire season or fire year, right? Like if you're prepared, you can really get through anything. And that's something that's kind of a motto that we have. So thanks for taking the time, and I look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow.
I just wanted to thank you guys for putting this together. This was a really awesome presentation and really, really valuable information. And honestly, just genuinely appreciate all of the care and thought that you guys are putting into this and helping folks kind of modify their planning for this upcoming fire year, which is essentially not upcoming anymore. It is here.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. It is definitely here. We've been honored to be able to shadow Michelle Fiddler's team, and boy, they were in the thick of it there with that type 1 incident, new starts, evacuations, road closures. So it is on, and we appreciate that. We appreciate you being here. Jamie Knight, lead from Oregon Department of Forestry, has a last-minute question about, do you have a white paper or some basic instructions for publishing YouTube and how to use the captioning? I have a couple different versions that I'll consolidate for you and get that to you. And appreciate that, Jamie. And it's always great to work with you. And we will go ahead and get back together tomorrow, 1 o'clock. The invite went out a couple weeks ago, so I'll go ahead and send another one out in the morning or with the afternoon email, probably the afternoon, just make sure everybody has it. And we're looking forward to having Jim Whittington, all his vast experience being brought to bear on the all-important incident within an incident. It's not if, it's when. Back to you, Chris, for the close.
All right, yeah, no, thank you, Kale. Again, I just want to thank everybody. Again, appreciate it, and everybody's been attentive. We'll see you tomorrow, and we'll go ahead and sign off at this point. Thanks, everybody.